1989 Ford Probe LX. If the bean counters at Ford had their way, this would have been your 4th generation Mustang. Oh yeah, this is the first review of 2021. Let's kick 2020 into the dumpster with some fantastic rad era Ford. Alright, let's just get it out of the way first thing. The Ford Probe was originally meant to be the 4th generation Mustang. Ford saw the rise in popularity in sports compacts, especially with the Toyota Celica and Honda Integra, and saw a shift in the market from a traditional muscle car. Another driving factor was the 1979 energy crisis, as the project with Mazda traces back to then. Toshi Saito was chosen as the design head, and by 1983 the project was transferred to Mazda in Japan. The SN16 Mustang followed the trends of the Japanese sport compacts, with its wedge design, front-wheel drive architecture, and small engines. The SN16 was intended to initially sell beside the Fox Body Mustang, which would then be referred to as the Mustang Classic during its slow phase-out process, while the SN16 would take on the reins as the Mustang. The SN16 Mustang would be built in Flat Rock, Michigan, alongside its new Mazda platform mates, the 626 sedan and MX-6 Sport Coupe. The front-wheel drive architecture and Mazda development had helped make the bean counters happy, as this meant costs would lower over the Fox-bodied platform. However, a massive wrench would be thrown into the cogs of the plan thanks to a release of an April 13, 1987 issue of AutoWeek. In a giant exposé written by Christopher Sawyer, it revealed that Ford was also aiming at the now cancelled GM80 project, which would see the switch of the Camaro and Firebird to front-wheel drive. Out-of-control project costs saw the death of the GM80, and the bones would create the Chevrolet Beretta and Corsica. With the prototype pics and illustrations very close to that of the final production Probe, the Mazstang article would come as a shock to not only Ford higher-ups, but the public as a whole. Public outrage was immense, and this led to a huge internal pressure to preserve the sanctity of the Mustang. Execs feared that chasing the champagne crowd would drive away the beer-sipping crowd. Yeah. By late 1987, North American Vice President of Operations, Alex Trotman, with the urging of Ford VP Bob Rury, declared that the direction of the SN16 would not make for a suitable Mustang. The project would live on as its own model, and the Fox Body Mustang would go through a major refresh to tide the buying public until a proper new Mustang could be developed. Pretty much the main reason for the SN16 to live on was that the project was set to roll onto the production floor in 1988, and things were just too late in the pipeline to cancel everything or even break off their contract with Mazda, without major losses and lawsuits. The end result would be named Probe, after the famous line of aerodynamic design study projects, which most notably led to the Taurus and Sierra designs. Another shift was simply to market the Probe towards its closest competitors, the Japanese sports compacts such as the Toyota Celica and Honda Prelude, rather than the Camaro and Firebird. Despite all of this turmoil that led up to the initial year of production, the result was a huge sales success in the first year. Demand was so high for this Japanese-designed sporty Ford that orders exceeded production numbers during the first year, and Ford would quickly greenlight a second generation to coincide with the second generation Mazda MX-6. Underneath the hood is one of 3 options. Either the 2.2-liter naturally aspirated Mazda F2 4-cylinder, a turboed version of the same engine, or Ford's 3-liter Vulcan V6. The last big outcry by the public over the SN16 is the lack of a V8 option, which, if you look underneath the hood of just this 4-banger, there really isn't any space underneath the hood for one. Anyways, moving on, you're hooked up to either Mazda's M5 manual or their G4A EL 4-speed automatic. Of course, power is sent to the front wheels, and independent suspension front and rear using McPherson struts at each corner soaks up the bumps. The Probe was very much a child of the 80s. Wedge design, wraparound glass hatch, pop-up headlights, and the option of a Turbo 4 or V6 in higher level models. Then there's all the little style-in details you don't initially notice. The two power bulges on either side of the hood. There's a black and red trim piece that accents the silver paint perfectly and wraps around the entire car. The side mirror also molds down into a trim line that follows the nose of the car. And then you get all 80s as hell with the rear taillights. All the fantastic quirks go into overdrive once you step inside the blue interior. Gaze upon the so 80s it hurts Alex optional digital dash.
Everything is digital. Everything is green.
The headlights and wipers operate these correspondent knobs on either side of the dash. The turn signal stalk? This weird little tiny stalk that's almost hidden by the very 80s steering wheel. There's a diagnosis screen on the bottom of the dash, proudly displaying that this particular Probe has a headlight out. Above the HVAC controls is a hidden button cluster for the computer that's on top of the center of the dash, and bits of the original stereo, which is long gone. The car surprisingly has a power driver's seat, and its controls are relatively easy to figure out. The rear seat, as expected, is cramped as all hell, but the hatch and cargo area are huge. There's plenty of room for both groceries and a giant subwoofer. Out on the road, it drives like a small, front-wheel drive Japanese car from the 1980s. The steering is kinda sloppy by today's standards, but it's still responsive and fun to carve around the back roads with. The automatic gearbox does a fine job of shifting smoothly for 1989, and despite being this a non-turbo 2.2-liter Mazda F2 4-cylinder, it still gets up to speed at a decent pace. The Probe is a very light car, and as a result, it feels light on its feet. The exhaust makes a decent four-banger snarl without being obnoxious, and the independent suspension soaks up the bumps with ease. My biggest complaint is... holy crap, the brakes suck in this thing. Like, they're kinda almost scary. As someone who's owned plenty of crappy trucks and cars in the past, these were some of the worst feeling brakes I've ever driven. I had absolutely no faith in the brake pedal. The top-of-the-line GT models got four-wheel disc brakes and ABS, but this one has drums in the rear, and they struggle. Which sucks because the rest of the driving experience is just fine. Everything just let down by the lacking confidence in those brakes. Anyways, this is the owner's first car. She bought it for $1,000 last year, and has slowly been getting it fixed up ever since. The car has sat for a couple of years before ending up in a tow yard due to reasons. At some point, a shed had fallen onto it, and someone has performed some not quality bodywork in this car's history. One of the previous owners had decided to install a stereo system, and proceeded to put in an amp that exceeds the output of the alternator. Rookie mistake, as the owner has had to get the alternator changed recently after learning that the stereo system absolutely kills the stock alternator. At some point she does plan on getting the stereo properly fixed, but she's in school at the moment, so until then she doesn't use the stereo and just uses a Bluetooth speaker. Anyways, other issues include an automatic transmission leak, various little odds and ends in the interior that have either broken or dislodged, which is expected with a 30-year-old Ford, and at some point the radiator's been recently replaced. And there's a slight leak at the fuel inlet when you fill the car completely with fuel. Yeah, this car only has 64,000 miles? They've been some rough miles then. This is a 30-year-old car, and it's unfortunately showing. It's cool that it's in such good shape as it is, but these Probes aren't exactly known for being as reliable as the cars they are aimed at, Celicas and Integras. That, and these cars are not easy to work on at all. The engine components on these are notoriously tight, and they got worse as you went up in engine options. Still, you can't deny, a 1989 Ford Probe LX on main streets in 2021 is just a cool sight to see. As mentioned before, the Probe exceeded sales expectations and was given a second generation. Introduced in 1994, the second generation Probe took the first gen's wedge-shaped and ran it through a jelly bean filter. The second gen was a huge improvement all around in all aspects over the first, but sales started to waver after the first year. There were plans for a third gen Probe, but waver in sales and Ford wanting to inject new life into the Mercury brand meant that the next small sport compact Ford would become a Mercury instead. The Mercury Cougar saw a shift over to Ford's CDW27 global platform instead of continuing the Mazda partnership, sharing its bones with the Ford Contour and Ford Mondeo. Seeing the gap in its own lineup, Ford kinda sportied up its coupe version of its Escort, the ZX2, but it simply did not have any of the pizzazz as the Probe. Yeah, and hindsight, that was more aimed towards a Chevrolet Cavalier Z24. Yeah. Anyways, in 2021, if you ask anyone about the Ford Probe, they'll probably make an anal probe joke like every slack-jawed yokel makes when they hear the name Ford Probe. Another thing that doesn't help the Probe in the long run is that it originally was going to become the Mustang, and the old head muscle car diehards flipped their ever-living shit over that. In a group chat I was talking with about my driving of this car, one of the dudes said, "I can't believe that was almost a Mustang." Unfortunately, people's long memories remember that this was almost a Mustang, rather than the fun little import fighting sport compact that it actually is. Ford and Mazda developed a cool little car, and let's remember it for that. 1989 Ford Probe LX. Let's remember it for what it is, rather than what it almost was. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. The first car of 2021 comes courtesy of Josie of Liberty, Maine. Thank you so much for letting me drive your project car. If you liked what you watched and want to follow more of the channel, be sure to like and follow the official Facebook page at facebook.com/WookieDrives for channel updates and random blurbs. Also, go ahead and follow my Twitter and Instagram at WookieAutomoTV for more Wookie rants and shenanigans. Finally, be sure to like the video, leave a comment, share with all your friends, and subscribe for more Wookie Drives like these. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good night.
One car manufacturer has more NHRA Pro Stock victories than anyone, setting more national records than anyone, including 5 consecutive world championships. That car manufacturer is Ford. And that kind of winning performance goes beyond the winner's circle